Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. I've spent most of today playing BioShock Infinite, the new DLC, Burial at Sea. It's pretty good. I might do a video as well, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, like talking about the story of that. Could be fun. Question mark. Let's get underway with this. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. The first question is from Remarkable91, who says, it's obvious what's going on with Scarlet and the Alliances. Every time it's the bad, evil version of playable races plus a common enemy. Flame Legion plus Dredge equals Molten. Inquest plus Pirates equals Aetherblades. And now Nightmare plus Crate equals Toxic. Do you think they should and will do the same thing with Bandits and Sons of Svanir? And what common enemy do you wish to see them working with? See, that's an interesting point because there are still a lot of other options to go for. Like, you say Bandits as the human enemy, and I guess, you know, that's the variant that matches the race, so that would make sense. But, you know, maybe they could pair up with Centaurs. Centaur is a pretty human enemy as well, right? And indeed, a lot of people say that. You know, maybe we'll have the leather, I don't know, what the hell would that be? Bandits plus Centaurs. Bandits riding around on Centaurs. Oh my god. If it meant that we saw bandits riding around on Centaurs, yes, I would love this idea. But purely only for that. Otherwise, no, I think this is a terrible idea. I've always stood for them going away from, you know, these cardboard plot lines where they just pick something and then do the match of it that, you know, that's spread across another race and then another match and then another match. I think it's stupid in the first place that every single race has got an enemy faction like this just conveniently in place there so that, you know, players can experience killing a Char as a human, or Char can experience killing a human and it still be lore friendly. It annoys me. These are just kind of excusey reasons why players are meant to have freedom in this game, and it sucks. It's not realistic, and it always pulls me away. You know, you're playing through the Order storylines and, oh, my best friend died as I was a part of the Order of Whispers, and halfway through the Dermot Priory storyline on that first time, you're like, I know this character's going to die. Everything is exactly the same. This character's going to die, and to, you know, put the cherry on top, she dies in exactly the same way as the previous person did, or, you know, whatever order you decided to play the Orders. I really don't enjoy that. I don't at all, and I would hate to see that they're still doing it for the living story. Already, the fact that we've got a Toxic Alliance here is a bit of a slap in the face. But this is still on the table. That's the worrying thing. This is still on the table. The news patch is obviously out now. And Scarlet, once again, we have slapped her about, set her back on her plans, and I explained this in my patch video, and yet she still, you know, she just laughs away and goes, ah, okay, awesome, and then leaves and acts like everything's going according to plan. It would be too easy for ArenaNet after this to then give us, you know, the Centaur Alliance with bandits riding around on them. Too easy. And then what? Eventually they'll just combine them all together. Some people have been vaguely excited by that concept. Oh, all three of the Alliance banding together, and then we're going to fight against the Pack. No, come on. It's just boring. Who doesn't get bored by that? 13-year-olds don't get bored by that. But everyone else, please, come on, something different. So no, I don't think it's a good idea, but it's something we might see, and we'll just have to roll with the punches if we do see it. Kunsfer, wow, your name, man. Your name could sound very bad if you read it wrong. Says, do you ever think we'll see the continent that ArenaNet originally designed for Guild Wars Utopia? Its Aztec design was just awesome. If you're looking forward to it for the Aztec design, then I would say to you, you don't really need Utopia. A lot of what they designed for Utopia has been re-rolled into Guild Wars 2 in a very roundabout way. For those who aren't aware, Guild Wars 1 used to have a campaign system where a new campaign would come out every 6 months. If you actually match up Guild Wars 2's timeline of content releases to Guild Wars 1's, it's kind of getting to a dire state now, because Guild Wars 1 had all of factions after this length of time, I believe. And then it was due to get Nightfall really quickly afterwards as well. And Guild Wars 2's just had loads of temporary stuff that's come and gone. And even the sum of it, I don't know whether it would match something as huge as factions. And as well, like, the company, when they were making... this is going to be a bit of a bitchy Q&A, I've got to say. The company back then, they managed to push out factions and Nightfall. They had, like, 50 employees back then. And now they've got 300. I was talking to someone about this the other day, and it just blows my mind that there is so many more people working at that company now, and we seem to have so much less going into the game. Very curious. But, you know, things like that don't scale linearly with companies. The more people you add, the more confusing it gets, the more opportunity there is for, you know, employees to slip through the cracks, or not necessarily, or be an employee there, you know, working a full-time job, but doing nothing to do with the development of the game, and so forth. But anyway, what I was originally saying is, after Nightfall came out, originally, ArenaNet were going to do Another campaign known as Utopia, which once again would take place on an entirely new continent, have a whole bunch of extra lore to do with it. Had a lot of stuff to do with time travelers. One of the new professions that was going to come out was going to be called a chronomancer. It had loads of concept art to do with giant gears and cogs. It had a class of enemy called Taniks, Taneks, and these, or just Tannic, I guess. And these guys were kind of very fiery-looking creatures, and many of the environments there were Mesoamerican. We just had Nightfall that was basically set largely on many different African-themed areas, and now we were basically going to Southern America. And they had all this concept art done. They had ideas for the continent as well. One thing people aren't really aware of, but they were going to, for that continent, for that campaign, they were going to take the concept of Guild Wars 1's missions, and they were going to have them like connect to one another in a huge web across the entire game world. This was entirely in Guild Wars 1, and you could only, and like the population of the Guild Wars 1 player base could only have access to some missions if previous ones had been completed. Basically, it was a really early concept of the dynamic event system. They found that it was too limiting, all these cool ideas that they had, found it was too limiting, and decided to go and make Guild Wars 2 instead. But at this point, they'd already made loads of assets and stuff, at least concept art. And so there is stuff you can look at for Utopia, even though it never existed. And, I guess some of it looks cool, but what you need to realize is that they looked at that concept art and they rolled that into Eye of the North. The Taniks I was talking about, they became the Destroyers. Maybe I can put like a comparison on screen there. The Taniks became the Destroyers, and many of these sort of Aztec-y looking areas, lots of these pyramids and so forth, they were basically rolled into what Ratasum became. Ratasum was a little bit more than that, I suppose, too. It was a very Magitech-y area, though, with Aztec stuff, dinosaurs thrown in for good measure. I wonder if the dinosaurs were a concept for Utopia. How cool would that have been? And now the dinosaurs aren't in Guild Wars 2, which really sucks. But yeah, so, and then, of course, the Tarnished Coast from Guild Wars 1, the Eye of the North expansion, eventually rolled round into Guild Wars 2, and the Destroyers from Guild Wars 1 are now in Guild Wars 2. So there are, in a really roundabout way, elements of Utopia that are in-game. Will they, to go to the original question though, will they ever go back to it? That's something I wouldn't expect to see for a very long time. There needs to be a few big things to happen to this game and ArenaNet's philosophies before we see anything like this come remotely true. First of all, they need to go on the course of believing that expansions are a good idea again, and they just frankly don't right now, which could be an incredibly big mistake, you know, if people feel like the Living Story content is... I've always maintained, okay, here's my opinion here. Living Story is great as something to tide you over while an expansion is in development. It cannot be a replacement. And ArenaNet are spending longer and longer and longer trying to make it a replacement, and it just doesn't work. I get excited on patch days, but as the week like goes on and I realize, oh, there's nothing to play, and you know, I got like a couple of hours worth of content out of this, you get more and more depressed as time goes by. And I think the community as a whole as well is getting more and more depressed by these Living Story updates. I'm in favor of them. They are awesome if they are while we're waiting for an expansion. But ArenaNet, you know, they've still not got any plans, or they've not announced any plans about an expansion to us, which is a terrible move. If internally they've decided we want an expansion, they need to tell us straight away. Anyway, I'm going to the expansion talk again. But basically, they need to decide, right, we're going to have expansions, and then they would be releasing, you know, Alona and Cantha before Utopia, I'm sure, whatever that region was going to be named. I'm sure they would be releasing those first, and then after that, who knows? Then they have to make another decision. We're talking so far into theoretical right now that it's just very unlikely to happen. It would be cool, but you know, it's so unlikely, especially considering the recycling of all of these assets. Well, not recycling, but you know, they've been folded into other stuff, and it might go further than just assets. Think about the lore itself. You know, they might have had all of this story written. I believe I've read an interview a long time ago where they said that, you know, they did pick and salvage the lore from what they were going to do there and sort of re-roll it into stuff we've seen. And the question becomes, well, what have they got anything left? Is that technically canon to them? Well, not really. It can be molded and shaped as they like. So it's an interesting prospect. I think the real question here is, what would Utopia have been like if they hadn't decided to make Guild Wars 2? And you can look into that a bit more, but maybe we're going out of the scope of the video. The next question is from Emma Signorelli. who says, "Hey WP, there seems to be lately an increase in the need for coordination and therefore the need for leadership roles. What are your thoughts on the commander tags? Firstly, being able to be purchased with gold, and secondly, a mere 100 gold. I think 100 gold's pretty good. I don't agree with this notion that commander tags need to cost loads and loads of money. Oh, it's got to be 1,000 gold so that they're really rare. You can't do that now anyway, because half the players have already bought their tags. What are you going to do, sell someone a red commander tag for 1,000 gold? No, not at all. I do agree with some of the ideas the community's had about these commander tags and how they could upgrade the system to, you know, allow people to pick a colour. So if you're out in World vs. World, people can type in map chat, okay, if you want to do this, go to the red commander. If you want to do this, go to the blue commander. The yellow commander needs more reinforcement. Stuff like that. That'd be cool. I do agree with that. But I think 100 gold is fine. I think 100 gold was maybe a little bit pricey at launch, but now with all the inflation in the game, yeah, 100 gold's fine. And do you know why? Because it doesn't matter. It's not meant to be some proof of skill. There are so many people who are like, oh, it's so stupid that you have to buy it with 100 gold. You need to prove yourself in World vs. World before you have it. It's not meant to be a proof of skill or anything. How are you even going to implement a system like that that only awards you once you've proved you can command properly without having a tag in the first place? It's just not going to work. This really, to me, is a barrier for people, because it's character bound, not account bound, and that's key. It's a barrier to people logging onto random alts and constantly trolling real commanders with, you know, their own little tags. This simply stops that. That's all it stops, and I think it serves perfectly well. It's 100 gold, so it means people who want to command, at least at one point in their lifetime of playing Guild Wars 2, they at least at one point really wanted to command or thought they'd have a good use of it. And those people are the ones with the tag. And yeah, in the future, they might decide to troll, but it cuts down on that massively. At the end of the day, when you're looking at World vs. World, which is really the only place these are actually relevant, when you're looking at World vs. World, most people, you know, they already know their commanders, or you can get a pretty good feel straight away of whether someone is worth following or not. And for that reason, I wouldn't mind if everyone in the community had one, except the fact that people might be able to troll. So yeah, 100 gold, I'm fine with it. Maybe I'd have more opinions if I was a heavier World vs. Worlder. A little bit of a non-Guild Wars 2 one here. Thomas says, hey WP, are there any games you don't like for specific reasons? The games you show on your channel are of course games you enjoy playing, but I wonder if there are games you thought were cool, but disappointed you when you played them. I don't often get disappointed by games. I tend to find that I'll try really hard to like it, and I'll probably find that I am enjoying it on some level, but then one day, if it's a game that hasn't really grabbed me, I won't quite twig that it hasn't fully grabbed me, and one day, it just won't occur to me to play to it. Like, I don't decide, oh, I don't like this, I'm not going to play. It just doesn't occur to me to play to it one day, and then like a month later, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, I was in the middle of playing that. Wow, I guess I wasn't enjoying it. That's my experience with most games. The only game I ever got really disappointed by, and I'm sure if I went back to it now that I'm older, I'd enjoy it. But when I was a bit younger, there used to be I'm sure they're still about, but there used to be these really terrible channels on TV where you got to watch, they were like game channels, okay? So they were basically just adverts for games, but longer, and, you know, people would be trying to do shows about it. Basically what people do on YouTube now, but it was on TV. And there were these terrible, terrible channels, really low budget stuff. But I remember seeing on one of these, at one point there was a game called Chaos League. And basically it was like a fantasy American football game, like strategy game. A lot like, if you guys watch TGS or Polaris as it is now, they did a Blood Bowl league recently. There's this game called Chaos League that was sort of like Blood Bowl, very, very similar to that. And I remember seeing that on TV and be like, oh my god, this is the greatest game ever. Got super hyped, super pumped, bought the game like a couple of weeks later, and it was constantly on my mind. It got right under my skin. And I played it for like 20 minutes, and I was like, I'm not enjoying this is terrible. And I'm sure I was foolish for thinking that, or I don't know, it's not exactly a popular game, so I'm sure it had flaws, but I didn't appreciate it for what it was at all, and I just put it down. So I am a little bit more genre wary now when I purchase games. Like, I very rarely, if ever, buy sports games. I just don't care for them. I very rarely, if ever, play racing games. I played a couple of racing games in my life, and I only ever got hooked on one, which was like an Xbox original game. But yeah, I'm just kind of a lot more genre wary, and I tend to know what I'm going to buy before I buy it now. So I don't get that disappointed. I don't. Obviously, some minor things are disappointing, but, you know, if you're getting legitimately really angry and depressed and upset because something isn't good, I do feel like you're maybe a little bit too close to whatever it is that you bought. Titus4285 says, speaking about the Forgotten, did these serpents ever reside in Ur? Was Ur empty when the Canthons first arrived there in 205 BE? I can specifically remember sources which state that the serpents served as the god's servants in Ur for a longer period of time, but now I can't find anything that supports that belief. Who built what? Yes, the Forgotten were certainly in Ur, without a doubt. The idea of the humans that were first there is really what comes into question, because Guild Wars 2, I don't know, did they just get it wrong? This is like one of those weird things like that Jotun in Holbrook that deliberately contradict prior knowledge we had from the first game. But there's a suggestion that the Orions, the gods, very first came to Ur and brought humanity there with them, while from the first game we do, of course, have this information that everyone was in Cantha first, and then they moved up to Ur. On the topic of the Forgotten, though, I can state with pretty high certainty that yes, the Forgotten were there. Don't forget that the Forgotten were, the Guild Wars 2's revealed that the Forgotten were on the planet before the gods were. So some of this stuff that was attributed to, they were working on behalf of the gods, isn't necessarily true. They could have been working on behalf of, for example, Glint before them, or any other entity, or even just off of their own accord. But there is this idea that the Forgottens were peacekeepers of the world. Very much they looked after the world, they fostered its growth when the gods came. My personal theory, and this is a lot of conjecture here, so don't take it as gospel, but my personal theory is that, the Forgottens were there to see the destruction largely of most of Tyria during the previous Elder Dragon's Rising that eventually came to its conclusion, and the gods arrived on the planet while it was in this wasted state, interacted with the Forgotten, who were one of these few races left, and the gods basically stated their goal of, look, we're here to build this place back up again, we're here to, replenish the magic within its ley lines or whatever, and perform their terraforming process. And the Forgotten, who were basically looking at this tragic landscape now, turned around and said, yes, we are definitely in agreement with what you want to do. And so the gods and the Forgotten worked together to rebuild the world and foster its growth. And during this time, the Forgotten were said to be, all around Tyria. However, as the races that were introduced to Tyria grew stronger, like the Char, for example, they may have been there from before, but, there are talks about how the Char were huge. The Char are basically the Jotun, but the only reason they didn't destroy themselves is because of the humans' existence. They had a common enemy to fight in the end. But the Char, like the Jotun, grew to be this phenomenal, massive, global race that, had dominion over basically all territories. And as stuff like this happened, the Forgotten were forced into recession. And eventually they ended up in the Crystal Desert. So I think it's very likely that they were in Ur before the humans arrived there. What that says about the Orient architecture, I really can't say. We have seen what the Forgotten architecture looks like. It's really quite a nice design. It's quite Egyptian. A lot of the pillars that you see, the teleporters out in the Crystal Desert in the first game, this was all very Forgotten architecture. The Orient stuff doesn't particularly match up. The Orient stuff is very Arabic in nature. But that was the original idea for Ur, and I would say that a lot of what you're seeing in Ur is built by Orion humans. That's what we're seeing the ruins of. And don't forget that the Orions were incredibly magically gifted people. They far exceeded the capabilities on average of the Ascalonians or the Crichtons or other humans that we've heard of, because they were living in such close proximity to the gods who themselves could basically do whatever the hell they wanted. And yes, many of the gods lived in their own city, but they will have gone out and visited the rest of the continent. And there's even lore which says that although most of them lived within Ara, Lissa actually lived out amongst the people. She just always lived out there, sort of usually in a guise or in a veil, but that's a cool idea too. Anyway, so yeah, I would say the Forgotten were there, but not necessarily the architects of what we see. The last question is from AlYNT, who says, is it still possible to play the first Guild Wars with Nightfall and all the expansions? This is because last Q&A I was talking about how awesome Nightfall was. And come on, guys. Okay, it feels like it was ages ago that this happened. I put the title of that video in reference to my ideas of, the Peter Jackson thing. That, Peter Jackson could be directing a Guild Wars movie. And how many people actually thought that was going to happen? Come on, guys, get a reality check. This is Guild Wars 2. This is not a very big franchise. This is not something that Peter Jackson would ever be doing. Like, it would be amazing, as I said, but you really can't believe for a second that would happen. That would be insane. But anyway, back to the question. AlYNT says, do you need an active online community to go through the story of Guild Wars 1? Are there still a lot of active players? I would say that there is still a community there. It fascinates me. I want to like talk to anyone that still plays Guild Wars 1. Like, I guess I could go in game and ask them why they're still playing it. There is still a community there. It's just like in the later days of Guild Wars 1 though. Most of the game will appear completely dead, but you go to the right areas like Kamadan, Jewel of Istan, and you will find that there are a lot of people around there. I'm very curious about the state of PvP over there as well at the moment. Like, I think you can like GVG, and if you win like one GVG, you'll go straight to the top of the leaderboards. Like, there's probably just a couple of guilds still out there playing. That would be amazing. Like, get 8 people back together and try and GVG again. What a cool idea. But there is a community there, definitely. It's a small one, and they're only in certain areas, though, which does mean that if you're going to try and play through the story, you're going to feel quite lonely. But that is not necessarily to play through the story. Guild Wars 1's always been a game that you can load up, the heroes and henchmen and play along with you. Do you know what I actually think would be a really thoroughly fascinating and cool experience? If you've got just one friend in this world that is vaguely interested in Guild Wars 1, convince them to play it with you. You can go through with one friend and really soak in that story. You need to take your time, and Guild Wars 1 is bad in a lot of respects for telling the story. Like, it's just as bad as Guild Wars 2. It just looks better in retrospect. Guild Wars 1 is just as bad as Guild Wars 2 for telling its story, especially like early prophecy stuff. But if you've got like one friend and you're willing to put a bit of time in, and really soak in the sights, look at the side quests, and absorb as much of the story as you can as you go, I think there's still an incredible amount of fun to be had in Guild Wars 1, and it makes me sort of warm inside to think of that idea. Like, I know the game too well at this point, but I sort of wish that I could go back just with one friend and sort of experience that game. Yeah, it will look out of date, it will look clunky. I do think that the game has aged rather poorly, and it will hit on you, especially if you've been playing a lot of Guild Wars 2. But you acclimate to that stuff. I've been playing Azuric, this Xbox original game recently. The game doesn't handle well. The graphically, it's got a nice art direction, but graphically it looks poor. But do you know what? Once I was halfway through, not even that, after 3 hours of playing the game, you acclimate to the way all of these old titles look, and it doesn't feel so clunky anymore. And I do think you could have a lot of fun playing through Guild Wars 1 still. I really do. And who would I be to say no to people going back to a game like that? Killing off any last little chance of a community it's got. There will be people there, definitely. And I would recommend it if you've never played it. I really would. Especially if you start with Nightfall. Given everything I've said last week, I'm sure you understand why. The story is great. If you take the time to read the walls of text, you acclimate to how it is. So fun. But there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope I had something to impart. Do leave your questions down below if you've got any more. There were plenty for me to pick through this week, though, so don't worry too much. But I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you tomorrow. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I'll catch you later.